verbally and through email. Why are we here? Why is the church here? The short answer is we're here to glorify God.
Amen.
Right out of the gate, whatever else mission we may have, whatever other commission we may be given, we're here to glorify God. Verses we're familiar with, 1 Corinthians 10, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God. 2 Corinthians 5, we make it our ambition or we make it our aim to please Him, whether at home in the body or absent from it. And if that's not enough, 1 Corinthians 6:19, or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God, and you are not your own. Therefore, glorify God in your body. So right out of the gate, that's who we are, what our purpose is. So with that in mind, let's go to God in prayer as we glorify Him this morning and this day. Let's bow. Father, we bow our heads, close our eyes out of respect, out of reverence, out of honor and glory and adoration that's due your name, your person, and what you do to enhance and bless our lives. Your grace is amazing. Your mercy is rich and abundant. Your love, thankfully for us, is unconditional, and your forgiveness is complete and total and constant. And for all those things and many more, we give you the glory, the honor, and praise forevermore. And we're thankful for Jesus. We're thankful the old story never gets old. And we're thankful for His death, burial, and resurrection. We're thankful for He's our mediator and our intercessor and continues to sit at your right hand and to give us every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places. So today we ask, Father, that we be attentive and open to what Dean has to say. And we're thankful that he's here. We're thankful for what he does with his family to accomplish this ministry and what a great work it is to encourage, to uplift, and to bless lives when they need it the most. And we give you this as an offering in Jesus' name. Amen. A lot of times when we watch commercials, I know I do, and there's a celebrity endorser, I want to ask them, are you being paid to do this commercial, or do you actually use this product, right? Is it a genuine thing? Hey, this stuff works, and you get, you call them the next 10 minutes, you get 2 of them, money back guarantee, and all that stuff. You think, where's this going? Well, this is going right here, that Dean Miller lives this ministry. He personifies and epitomizes to God's glory the things that he's going to share with us today. He's living it. He's doing it. And his character and demeanor and countenance and everything about himself tells us love, care, compassion, and concern. That's Dean Miller. And he's many more things. But for us this morning, you're going to be blessed, you're going to be touched, and you're going to be impacted by what he has to share for us today. So, Brother Dean Miller and the Living with Lost Workshop.
Jim. Good morning.
Good morning.
We want to make sure that everybody receives a notepad. If you did not get one yesterday, an ink pen. The notepad and the ink pen are expressions of appreciation from my ministry for you choosing to come to the workshop. And then the church also has prepped these stapled together documents that you can take home with you, and maybe they can be of value to you at home as you reflect and maybe think about yourself, the struggles that you've been through with loss, and how maybe you could help other people. So we just want to provide as much in the way of resources as we can to help you, because the reality is everybody needs help. Now, not everybody's willing to admit that, but everybody needs help. This life can really be a struggle sometimes, and that's especially true when we hit on hard times. Now, I have a very low bar about this morning, in regard to my expectations, and here's why. This is actually a compliment. Yesterday, the 2 sessions we had at 7 in the evening and then 10 in the morning. I've been on the road in 22 states. I have not counted how many workshops of this nature that I have done. I cannot remember any sessions I've ever had where the people were more receptive, that the atmosphere was any better, the attention was more focused, and that I enjoyed any more than I did yesterday, those 2 sessions. So today, I know you can't hit that mark. So it's just not possible. You ain't got it in you, okay? So my expectation in regard to this morning is pretty low, okay? But I'm still hoping that you get something out of this. And that's always the goal I have, is be a blessing. If we in our lives, we just strive to be a blessing every day, what's going to happen is we will be a blessing, and we'll be blessed because we chose to be a blessing. So I'm real thankful that you're here. Again, just like I said yesterday, you could be other places, you could be doing other things. You chose to come here, and I want to praise you for that. I want to compliment you for that, because I know that this is not a very popular subject. Now, again, we always make it a point to not permit this to be drugged down to some sort of doom and gloom atmosphere. And boy, you certainly didn't do that yesterday. That was a lot of fun. You know, I just think it's interesting how that people a lot of times after a workshop will come to me and they almost apologetically use the word enjoy. I enjoyed the workshop. It's a Living with Loss workshop, but it's hard for them to express, I enjoyed this workshop about this subject. They almost feel conflicted, I think, internally. Well, you can enjoy if you create the right kind of atmosphere, even when the subject matter may be pretty challenging, pretty touchy, and pretty challenging. I think it's important to correct a misunderstanding that a lot of people jump to whenever I go places. Now, let me correct that misunderstanding. I carry around with me a notebook. I got this for Christmas. One of my kids got this for me. WW logo. You notice my shirt has a WW logo. Now let me correct your misunderstanding. I am not representing Weight Watchers, okay? This is Widowhood Workshop, okay? I want to make sure that you realize that you have not come to a session of Weight Watchers. As a matter of fact, they'd kick you out if they found out what you had over there in that other room. But those were the Lord's calories. You don't have to worry. We're not going to be stealing the Lord's calories. We're just going to let him have them. Now, something happened to the clicker. Okay. Let me explain to you what one guy and why is it? Oh, it's just not happening on this screen. Okay. Okay, let me explain. Yeah. Now, I need to explain a little bit about the ministry before we delve into what grief does to us. The Widowhood Workshop Ministry, as I explained yesterday, is a ministry that doesn't merely focus on the widowed, though they certainly deserve a lot of special attention. It's not exclusively about the widowed. The Widowhood Workshop Ministry is attempting to glorify God by educating people about the powerful impact of loss and help them navigate the things that they experience after loss. So it's all about educating and encouraging. What the Widowhood Workshop Ministry is, it's my family's response to my wife's death. To my 3 daughters, they lost their mother. My sons-in-law lost their mother-in-law. And my 5 grandchildren, they lost Nana. The Widowhood Workshop Ministry is my family's passion project. The things that you received in the way of the notepad, the pen, and something else you're going to receive here after a bit are all gifts from my family to you because you chose to come to the workshop. We have chosen to react to our loss in a way that glorifies God by trying to help other people, by attempting to educate and encourage. And to be honest with you, it also, to a great extent, was our therapy early on. Whenever you've suffered great loss, sometimes you need therapy. Sometimes you need professional therapy, and there's no reason to be hesitant about embracing professional counseling when you've gone through great loss. But there's also other things and other experiences that can be therapeutic. And one thing that can be therapeutic is getting out there and trying to help other people. Amen. Because anytime that you are attempting to be a blessing and help other people, you know, if you've ever experienced it, you're always more blessed than they are. And that is the great thing about serving the Lord and serving others, because you serve the Lord. This picture was taken, I wanted to explain to you, this picture was taken in July. 7 years ago, we made a decision as a family that we were going to begin hosting a retreat exclusively for widowed people. For many, many years, for decades, I worked at Northeastern Ohio Christian Youth Camp in Lisbon, Ohio. We have youth camps to serve the youth. We have youth meetings. We have CYC. There's all kinds of things that we have for young people. There's also a Smoky Mountain marriage retreat in East Tennessee, and single people, widowed people don't go to that. That's for married people. You women have ladies' days, and men don't get to come to ladies' days. And I thought, well, what are we doing in regard to the widowed who have experienced a severe loss in their life that to many of them shakes them to the core of their being? What have we done to give some special opportunity for them to be encouraged? And so my family committed 7 years ago to hosting a nationwide widowhood retreat. Now, it doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter what your church affiliation may be. It doesn't matter how long ago or how short the time was that you experienced the loss of your spouse. If you're widowed, you're invited to come to this event. It is held in Laverne, Tennessee. The Laverne, Tennessee Church is the overseeing congregation of the Widowhood Workshop Ministry. That Laverne, Tennessee is between Nashville and Murfreesboro on I-24. Now, what we decided to do was we decided to just throw this out and just do some advertising and invite widowed people, and we do not require registration. You can come on the spur of the moment. Now, that makes my daughters nervous because they're in charge of all the details. But they're not Martha people. They do a great job of prepping. You don't have to register. Now, we appreciate your registration, and you pay no registration fee. A lot of times when you go to a retreat, you can pay $100, $200, $250. You don't pay a single penny to come to this. The Widowhood Workshop Ministry, my family's passion project, we fund the entire thing. So we invite widowed people to come from all over the country. Last July, we had 168 widowed people there from 18 different states. We've had them fly in from Washington, from Texas, from Florida. I even let people from Michigan come. And I'm an Ohio State Buckeye fan. So I'm very loose about who we let come. As long as you're widowed, you can come, okay? But it's a joyful, you talk about a joyful experience. There was this lady in Canton, Ohio. Her husband died, and he was an elder in the Lord's Church, the Northwest Church in Canton, Ohio. And he passed away, and she chose to come to the retreat. This was 3 years ago. Now, she's still in her work life season of her life. And she told her fellow employees in the office that she was going to a widowhood retreat. And the response of those coworkers was, "Oh, that sounds like it'd be really hard." That is the conception that people have about when you get a bunch of widowed people together. Nothing could be further from the truth. You get those widowed people together, and when they know that they're there and have a common bond with everybody else who suffered great loss, it is amazing how easily they assimilate. Now, in your culture here, you know that when people have a military background, when they meet, even though they're strangers, when they meet the first time and they find out that they have a military background in common, immediately they assimilate. Where have you been stationed? What rank? How long? There's all kinds of things, and we just immediately start conversing. The same thing is true with the Widowhood Workshop Ministry. We help get widowed people connected with other widowed people. Now, let me mention something. A part of this ministry is that we have a private Facebook group. Now, this is a private Facebook group. There's 2 qualifications. Number 1, you have to have lost your spouse. And number 2, you have to be a member of the Church of Christ. Now, I'm not suggesting that we're some kind of snobbish group because it's only widowed people in the Church of Christ. As a matter of fact, if somebody is here or other people I've met, I've said the same thing. If other kinds of churches would like to start these kinds of private Facebook groups, I'll help them. Because I think when you have a commonality of your religious faith, you have a sense of transparency that you're more likely to experience and be more helpful to one another. So I'm not apologetic about the fact that it's only for members of churches of Christ. But let me tell you, there are a little over 400 people in this private Facebook group, and they're from all over the country. It is not a boo-hoo kind of private Facebook group. It is very positive, it's educational, and it's encouraging. Now, if you're on Facebook and you're a member of the Lord's church and you've lost your spouse and you'd like to be a part of this private Facebook group, I'll help you to be able to accomplish that. And you can develop some connections with some other people that you may never meet. You may meet at the retreat if you come to the retreat, but one of the things we do is we help build the social network of people who've gone through great loss in regard to the loss of their spouse. So you see how the Widowhood Workshop Ministry is helping people who suffered great loss with a special, on occasion, unique interest and emphasis on the widowed. Jim, you were going to say something?
When's the next widowhood retreat?
July 18 through 20, 2025. July 18 through 20, 2025. And let me tell you about what a church in Ohio did. They said to their widowed people, if you want to go to the retreat, you let us know. And we'll pay for your transportation to get you there. We'll drive you there. And we'll pay for your lodging expense at a hotel. That's what one church did. You think those widowed people appreciated that? That unique special interest? Typically, what the widowed folks do is they get together. If you fly in, we'll pick you up. You don't have to rent a car. We'll provide. We have an Uber Goober, we call him, who picks people up at the airport. And we transport everybody from where they're lodging to where the activities are. We just make it a special point to treat widowed people like royalty. That's what we do. And we just have a ball. It's a really great experience. Very faith-building and very much a value in regard to network building. And those are a couple of needs that widowed people really have. So I just wanted to show you, on Saturday, we had an Hawaiian theme. And that's why my family was dressed like this. As a matter of fact, I have some pictures. We got a guy who brought in a whole hog and cooked that hog during the night on Friday night. And that whole hog was just laying there wide open. And my oldest granddaughter, with her gloves on, dug in to that pig and put that barbecue right on the plate. It was a really fun Hawaiian experience that we had Saturday. Yes, Elmer?
I was wondering why you picked July 18th. That's my anniversary.
Oh, okay. You come, and we'll make it a point of celebrating your anniversary. We would love to be able to do that. But that gives you a little bit of insight into what the Widowhood Workshop Ministry is all about. Well, here's the reality. The reality is life happens. We're born into this world, and when we're born into this world, we become attached to things, and we're going to suffer loss. It's just a matter of how much loss we're going to experience and what those losses are. And when you look at life that way, with that mathematical equation, what that equals is you're going to struggle. You're going to have issues, and you're going to suffer grief, and you're going to have some real challenging experiences. What does grief do to us? Well, one thing it does is it confuses our thinker. Whew! It really confuses our thinker. Now, how many of you have suffered what you would perceive as great loss? It could be the loss of your spouse, it could be the loss of a child, but I'm talking about a great loss. How many of you have suffered a great loss? Okay, now, let me ask you this. A couple of you, would you be willing to share, how did that affect your ability to think? Now, anybody willing to share something about that? Yes, ma'am? Claudia?
Well, Len was 100% disabled.
Okay, how long was he 100% disabled? Do you remember? Years?
10, 20 years.
10, 20 years, okay.
But I worked outside of the home, so he worked in the home. He did all the bills, he did it all.
So he did the inside stuff and you worked outside the home.
And if I wanted some money, I'd call him and say, honey, can I have some money? He'd say, how much? And then he'd tell me.
Honey, I want some money. He says, how much? And then he gave you what you asked for times 2, I'm sure.
Sometimes.
Sometimes, okay.
But after he died, I'd get a bill in the mail, and I'd think, oh, that's not due till the 20th. I'd stick it in the drawer and forget about it, and I'd end up owing late charges or whatever.
Okay, she gets a bill. She sticks it somewhere. She forgets where it is. You know, you don't really think very clearly after you've suffered great loss. And there's a reason for that. It's hard to think straight. Anybody else? Observation? Yes, sir.
Just real quick, I lost a son, okay?
What age?
I lost a son.
What age was he?
He was maybe 6 months old.
Okay, about 6 months
I
old.
want to say, you brought this up yesterday, and that was that we repress those emotions, okay, of the loss.
Men are especially bad, or I should say, especially good at doing that, repressing the emotions.
It doesn't go away. You see what I'm saying? Years down the road, you still have to deal with that.
Yeah. You stuff it. I think that maybe is what we think a survival skill of some sort. We think we have to do that to survive, stuff the skill. But if you put air in a balloon, how much air will that balloon hold? It only holds so much. And then what happens? It blows up. You know, when we stuff emotions, stuff thoughts, and we just keep stuffing and stuffing, at some point in time, we're just going to blow up. Yes, ma'am.
I'm still dealing with the loss of my second husband because he just died. My first husband, we were young, I was working, my boss used to be amazed at my mind because I could remember who changed name, what company changed names to what and what.
So you were good at details at work?
And after my first husband died, and I still don't have
And how old were you when your first husband died?
34,
34. Okay.
and I just recently lost my second husband. Still dealing with that.
Hard to think straight, isn't it? Hey, by the way, if you have a normal life, do you have trouble thinking straight? Okay, now, throw into that life now, that normal life of yours, a crash and burn, a tragic loss, either after long-term caregiving or maybe an immediate, sudden, totally out of the blue, unexpected loss. Okay, throw that into the mix. If you struggled keeping your ducks in a row, some people don't even know where their ducks are. Okay, but anyway, you know, we have trouble keeping our ducks in a row when our life is normal, when we're in a normal season of our life. Now, when you throw into your life something that is so significant as a great loss, you're really going to struggle mentally. One thing that great loss will do is it will confuse your thinker. Some people talk about living in a fog. They use that word fog. It's like living in a fog. And I think that's very descriptive. And it's very common for people to have that struggle. Now, I wrote 3 books about widowhood, and one is called After the End Comes. About the time I was ready to submit that for printing, it dawned on me that I'd met this lady, Cindy Bostic, in Southern California when I was at Apple Valley, California. I was very impressed with that lady. She was a widow, definitely a younger type widow, and I thought, I'm going to send the manuscript to Cindy, and I'm going to ask her for feedback. So I sent the manuscript to Cindy, And she sent me back some suggestions, and I'm so glad she did. And one of the suggestions she said, Dean, before you put that book to print, I want to introduce you to this book. It's called The Grieving Brain. She said, it's very, very interesting. And she said, you might want to read this book and incorporate some of it into your book. Now, this is a very current book. I think that one of the most impressive things about this book, 2022, is that it's written by a neuroscientist who is also a psychologist. For decades in her life, she has studied from a scientific perspective the effect of grief on the brain. She's done her MRIs, her CT scans. She's also done her interviews because she's also a psychologist, a therapist. So from both the therapist perspective and the neuroscientist perspective, having studied the effect of grief on the brain, she writes this book. It's fascinating. A lot of times when we think about a loss, we think about the emotional effect. And it has tremendous emotional effect. However, sometimes what we think is grief is solely an emotional experience, and that's not true at all. As a matter of fact, one thing that we need to learn is it's also a mental struggle. That grief, severe loss, and the grief that we experience has an effect on the brain. Now, let me read to you a section out of this book, because I think this really sets the stage for understanding the effect of loss on the brain. Even when a person has been ill for a very long time. Now, my wife was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and she went downhill much more quickly than the typical Parkinson's patient, 8.5 years. And Parkinson's does not typically, it's life-altering, it's not life-threatening, but for my wife it was both, and Parkinson's did take her life, and maybe I'll have a chance to explain that tomorrow. So my loss was after 8.5 years of caregiving. I'm curious, anybody here experience a sudden loss? The opposite, okay. Sometimes it's a sudden loss. I mean, you're just blown away. It really reminds you in a very personal way about what James said in James 4. You do not know what will happen tomorrow. That's right. Man, you could get a call. You can have somebody knock on your door. I got a call about midnight one night from a young man who was in the Army, and then he transitioned to be a guard. And he was a leader among the Ohio National Guard. And one weekend, when he got his group together, they had their weekend experience, and then they were sent home. And when they were sent home, one of the people in his group committed suicide. And he called and he said, Dean, I've got to take the flag to his parents in Columbus, Ohio. And he said, basically he was asking me, can you kind of coach me up here? How can I handle this? He had never been through that experience before. It is just so personal. It is such a struggle when we deal with these kinds of things, and we just have no idea about the state or condition of the people we might be going to try to help or minister to them. And one thing we need to recognize is that this is not merely an emotional experience. So she says, even when a person has been ill for a very long time, no one knows what it will be like to walk through the world without the other person. My contribution as a scientist has been to study grief from the brain's perspective, from the perspective that the brain is trying to solve a problem when faced with the absence of the most important person in the life of us. Grief is a heart-wrenchingly painful problem for the brain to solve. And grieving necessitates learning to live in the world with the absence of someone you love deeply who is ingrained in your understanding of the world. This means that for the brain, your loved one is simultaneously gone and also everlasting, and you are walking through two worlds at the same time. You are navigating your life despite the fact that they've been stolen from you, a premise that makes no sense that is both confusing and upsetting to your brain. Now, gone but yet present. Gone in the sense that we know from the Bible that when a Christian passes away, 2 Corinthians 5 says, they're now absent from the body, they're no longer with us, present with the Lord. Praise the Lord for that. Now, there's a sense in which, though, they're still here. Because you have neurons popping between your ears in your brain. And in your brain, that person exists. That person exists in your brain. But that person is no longer with you. And she describes the brain sometimes operating like these. Have you ever watched the screens, these kids? I bet there's even some of you adults who do this. These virtual games that people get hooked on, and you have this virtual map that is in that game, that electronic game. She said your brain kind of operates like that on occasion. And your brain, when your brain is affected by something, your brain just kind of moves around and is trying to find some place to park. Now, she said whenever she starts counseling, doing grief counseling, whenever she starts doing grief counseling, she tells this story. She said, imagine going to sleep and you're a real sound sleeper. And while you're asleep, some people break into your house and steal your dining room table. And then after your table is stolen, you wake up and you feel thirsty. And so you go to the kitchen to get a drink. And on the way to the kitchen, you pass through the dining room. And of course, it's dark. It's nighttime. And so you're passing through the dining room, and right where your hip should hit the side of the dining room table, your hip doesn't feel anything. And immediately your brain, bing, 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 your brain is alerted. Not to something that's there, but to the fact something is not there. Your brain reacts to what's not there, that it's accustomed to seeing, and then your brain reacts to what is present as well. I referred to in one of the sessions yesterday, what if somebody were to turn a lion loose in this building? Well, if you heard the roar or you saw the lion, immediately through your ears and eyes, your brain would be alerted, and there would be an alert. Something is not normal, something is not right. Well, the same thing is true when your brain senses something it's had to become accustomed to now is absent. And your brain is wondering what in the world is going on here. So you're struggling mentally. Now, you probably have heard people say, boy, if you suffer great loss, be real careful don't be making big decisions. Cut yourself some slack here and back off. How long have you heard a person ought to wait before they start making big decisions after loss?
A year.
A year? Okay. Anybody ever heard 2 years? Let me tell you what one widowed person wrote about. She said that when you suffer great loss, especially if it's the loss of your spouse, she suggested what you ought to do is appoint a board of directors for your life. Now, you are appointing yourself as the chairman of the board, but you need to have go-to people who can help you to think through things. In my case, it was my 3 daughters. I knew that there were things that I needed to run by them or other people before I made big decisions. There may be things, for instance, about material things like a house or a car. It could be that there are financial concerns or issues. It could be there are faith-based kinds of issues or questions. You need to have people in different areas of your life that you trust, that you can go to, you can sit down and say, hey, here's the deal. Here's some facts. Here's my feelings. Help me out here. Be a sounding board. Give me some advice. Having people in your life like that is very, very valuable after you've suffered great loss because your brain is confused. Grief confuses your thinker, and that's why you need help thinking. Now, that's one of the really nice things about this private Facebook group that we have. I love how that the people in that group, if somebody throws something out about something that they've experienced or something that they're anticipating, there's a lot of feedback that is evidenced in that group. And I just love how, they're just thinking out loud together. And they're basically helping one another navigate certain things in their life, twists and turns, after they've suffered great loss. Some people give me the distinct impression they know everything about everything. Now, some people not only give me that impression, they'll tell you straight out that they do. Now, the reality is nobody knows everything about anything. Amen. Now that's a humbling reality, but the sooner we come to grips with that reality, the better off we're going to be in life. Nobody knows everything about anything. So, in light of that fact, and the fact that your brain is confused, you are at jeopardy. I don't have the time, but I'd love to tell you 2 or 3 stories about people who did really dumb stuff. I'm talking about even tragic things. They made decisions that were just mind-boggling to their families, to other brothers and sisters in the Lord, and I'm talking about preachers' wives, preachers, elders, as well as other members of the Lord's church. Do not underestimate the power that grief has on the brain. Make sure that you have a board of directors for your life. Go to people where you can talk to them about things that you wonder about. Well, to add to the problem, what does grief do to us? Well, it messes with our feeler. See, one of the things that makes us different from a tree, a laptop, a pew, is that we exist in the image of God and after His likeness. We have a thinker and a feeler. We're not a cow in the pasture. We're human beings. We have a thinker and a feeler. Our thinker is confused when we're grieving, and then that grief messes with our feeler. Now, what that causes is internal confliction. You can know stuff in your thinker, but your feeler is screaming something else. As a matter of fact, Lord willing, if we have tomorrow, I'm going to share with you a time in my life where, although I knew it would be very appropriate to praise the Lord, my feeler screamed at me, I do not want to praise the Lord. I'll admit to you a time in my life when that happened to me. Sometimes your feeler can be so hyper in overdrive that it just dominates your thinker. Now, yesterday we mentioned about how that, when you have a really positive, wonderful kind of experience, that sometimes you can celebrate, but you're not sensible. And so you do stupid because you're not thinking, you're just feeling, and so you go overboard. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, when an awful thing happens, we have to realize that that can be so dominating that, again, we don't make good choices. We don't choose wisdom. James Dobson is a man I deeply appreciate. Just a few weeks ago, I was visiting on the campus of his Focus on the Family Ministry in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And he wrote a book called Emotions, Can You Trust Them? Now, what's interesting about that book is after he wrote that book, he wrote another book that I really love. It's called Life on the Edge. Now, this book, Life on the Edge, is a book that my wife and I often bought high school seniors who were graduating as our gift to them in light of their high school graduation. Because that book, Life on the Edge, is a book written for people in what he calls the critical decade of life. He identifies age 16 through 26 as the critical decade in life. And the reason why he calls it that is he says, during that decade in life, we make decisions that could radically and negatively impact our life the rest of our life. We also could make decisions during that period of time, during that decade, that forever build a solid foundation for a beautiful life that brings glory to God. He calls it the critical decade of life. Now, in that book, as you read through that book, he makes reference to this other book, Emotions, Can You Trust Them? And he says, I can reduce that previous book that I wrote of over 200 pages, I could reduce it all to one word. No. But he only tells you that after he sells probably millions of those books. Yeah, very smart man, very intelligent, very sharp. You cannot trust your emotions. You just can't. God did not create us to make emotional decisions. Now, emotions play a part in almost every experience we have in life. And they do have a way of affecting our lives. That 15-year-old girl I was telling you about that I met when I first started going to church, where I was way more attracted to her than I was the Lord. I didn't even know who the Lord was. Never read the Bible. So, you have to cut me some slack there, okay? And I am a human being, and I was only 15 years old. So when I saw that red, white, and blue dress she had with the red belt, it was just like immediate emotional attachment. So we make decisions that are affected somewhat by our feelings, but at the same time, we need to be careful that our feelings don't become dominant. And the reason why is our feelings, if we're not careful, they can become our dictator. They can really become what dominates and controls us and calls the shots. And when that happens, that's really bad. In one of the sessions yesterday, I mentioned that a young lady growing up in the church who sincerely loves the Lord. I mean, there's no doubt about the sincerity of her faith. A girl of that nature, on a date with her boyfriend, in a heat of passion, could gift her virginity to that boy. Not because she's thinking straight, but because she's feeling hyper. The same thing's true with a man. But the reality is, boy, you have to be careful about letting your emotions make your decisions. Jim, you were going to make some comment, I thought?
No.
Okay. We've got to realize that, now, okay, here's an example. I referenced 2 Corinthians 5. My wife died. She's absent from the body in our house. The funeral director, him and his wife, were friends of mine. They weren't Christians, but they were friends of mine. And I'm so glad that one of the memories I have, and I look back with a sense of appreciation for this, I said, would you let me help take my wife's body out to your Suburban? And so I was able to help take her body out to that Suburban. That wasn't her, but that's where she lived for 61 years. I knew that she was gone. She went home to be with the Lord. Now, is that a good thing? That's glory.
That was part of your job.
Yeah, that was part of my job of being supportive and loving her. I did everything I could to the very end, and she's gone. So she's with the Lord. Now, where would it be better to be than be with the Lord? So she's with the Lord. So my thinker knows that. Okay, but she's not here. And my feeler feels that. So you talk about a mess. You talk about a struggle. And one of the things that's really hard to deal with is stuff, but at the same time you feel this other stuff. And it's just such internal confliction whenever you've suffered great loss. Now, what we've got to realize is that there can be seasons in our life when we're in an intensive care phase of our life. Now, anybody here ever been in intensive care as a patient? Anybody? Okay, there are people here who've been in Now, why do people get put in intensive care? Somebody explain that to me. They're critical, they need more care. Okay? Now, everybody in that hospital is there for a reason, and they need care. But then there's a certain group of people who need different care than everybody else in the hospital, and we call it intensive care. Now, what's different about intensive care in regard to that care than care in a regular room? They do what, Claudia?
I said they take more blood.
They take more blood. Yeah, they're blood suckers. Yeah. In intensive care, they take more blood than they do other places in the hospital. Can I take you home with me? I'll tell you what. Jim, when we get that bus and go on the road, she's going to be a roadie too. Okay? Besides taking more blood,
Yeah, more moderating, more people are monitoring.
more people are monitoring you, okay?
And you're more likely to have more attention.
You're more likely to have more attention.
Because you don't have, the nurse doesn't have 15 patients, she just has one or one.
When I was a local preacher, I spent a lot of time in the hospitals. And when I had the opportunity, I always, out of curiosity, tried to engage with nurses if they came in the room. And I would ask them about the patient-nurse ratio on their shift. Well, sometimes I left a little concerned. Boy, thank the Lord for nurses. Nurses are wonderful people who have a good heart, who are underpaid and overworked and overstressed. But the reality is there are times, because of our body's condition, we need special care. There are seasons in our life when we need to recognize the fact we're in an intensive care phase of our life. Don't pull this stunt. Now, I'm south of the Mason-Dixon line, but I'm brave. I hear this more from men south of the Mason-Dixon line than anywhere else. You know, Dean, in regard to all this stuff you talk about, what you need to do is you just need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You talk about slapping people. I slap those people in my brain, okay? Have you ever stopped to think about how arrogant that is? Where's God in that? You just got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Where's God? No, what we need is we need the Lord. And we need the Lord working in our life providentially to cope with the storms in our life. This pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you know, that is independence to a fault. That's what that is. Some people need some help pulling their pants up. That's right. And we need to admit it. And that's why we're in the hospital. Think about what they do in the hospital, especially in intensive care. They're doing pretty near everything for you. Because you need it. Now, can you imagine laying there in the intensive care unit and somebody comes up to you wanting to do something and you say, no, that's okay, I'll be fine. Now, how dumb is that? You know, they come because they want to help you. Now, the same thing can happen sometimes when people are grieving. We have people who want to come and help us, but we stick a hand out and we say, no, I'm okay. No, you're not okay. You're a human being. You suffered great loss. You're a mess. You need help. Embrace the fact that you need help. Now, stop and think about 1 John 4 and 1 John 5. God is love. God loves us. So what are we supposed to do with others? We're supposed to love others. Now, have you ever stopped to think about this? Whenever somebody wants to help you, engage in your life and help you, and you say, no, what have you stopped? You've stopped that person from doing exactly what God wants them to do to show His love to you. you've also cheated that person of a blessing. It's more blessed to give than to receive. We always find great joy and blessing in helping other people. Whenever we don't permit other people to help us, we are cheating them of the joy of giving and supporting and helping others, and we're thwarting God's purpose in His love being shown to us through other people. And God does often His greatest work through the people He providentially blesses us with in our lives. Let other people be a part of your life. I love what this one guy did when his friend was hurting. He was struggling, a very difficult phase in his life. He came and knocked on his friend's door, and he said, I don't know what you have been doing in regard to your landscaping, but whatever you've been doing, you're not doing anymore. I'm taking that over at no expense to you. I know you need to focus on what you're going through. This is my help to you. He didn't ask for permission. He came and told the guy what he was going to be doing. That is the way we need to minister to hurting, suffering people. No matter what the nature of or the kind of suffering or struggle they're going through, that's what we need to be doing. Have you ever thought about what we're doing when we go to somebody and we say, what can I do to help you? Now, I know why do we say that? Why do we go to somebody and say, what can I do to help you? What's our motivation? Okay, we care and we want to help, right? Okay, now, have you ever thought about what you just did when you asked that question to that person? Okay, here's a person who is struggling. They've had something awful that they're going through in their life. Could be great loss, and they're grieving. They got a lot of issues going on, having a hard time thinking straight. Their feeler is working overtime. Okay, now you come to them and you say, how can I help you? Now, what have you just added to their life? Jim?
You've added, their thinker's already messed up and you've added a burden to their thinker.
Yeah, that's right. Their thinker is already struggling. It's confused, and you have added yet another thing that you're putting on their list for their thinker to do. You've actually... And given them an out? What do you mean by that?
Well, if you are asking them, can I do something for you, then that kind of turns the question around.
Okay, when you ask what can I do for you, it turns the
Right.
question around. Okay?
That doesn't make sense to you, right? You're giving them, does anybody else understand?
Yeah, I get it.
Miss Becky?
No, I think when you're grieving, sounds to me like making any decision is overwhelming.
That's right.
And you can't think of what anyone can do for you right at that moment.
Yeah.
Maybe just like knock you out other than knock you out.
Yeah. Yeah. Your thinker is confused, and, you know, and Becky suggested if you didn't hear it, well, what can I do for you? Well, could you knock me out? I'd appreciate that. Boy, that sounds like a Josephine response. Jim?
I don't know if this will help Ellen's comment, but I'm not trying to throw asparagus on the care and concern of that question. Sometimes it's an unfeeling Christian platitude.
Oh, it's the canned thing we should say.
It's an out, like, what can I do for you? No one, they may not figure it out, or...
And they probably won't be able to answer you.
And the same statement is, call me if you need me.
Yeah. Oh,
And
please.
Same thing. Same thing. You're trusted that they're probably not going to call, but
Yeah.
I checked that box of care and concern.
Yeah.
You know,
Call me if you need me. So you check the box. You're off the hook now. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Well, when my son died, the ladies of the church.
How old was your son?
26.
26. When your son died, go ahead.
The ladies, some of the younger ladies of the church, they didn't ask me if I needed my house clean. They just came and said, "Where's your cleaning supplies?"
That's exactly. So they came to your house and did not ask you if your house needed cleaned. They came and cleaned your house.
Yeah.
You've probably heard people say that it's, what is that saying about it's, instead of asking for permission, It's easier to
Beg forgiveness.
beg for forgiveness than ask for permission. Yeah, just jump in there and do something, because that way you're being of service, you're making an impression, and you're not adding to their burden. You're lightening the burden. Now, a lot of times we are hesitant to do that kind of thing because we don't know what those kind of people need. Now, what I mean by kind of people is if a person is struggling with something and you're unfamiliar about what people need when they're struggling with something, let me suggest to you something. We have a thing called computer. You can Google stuff about what it's like to go through different things. And doing research like that ahead of time gives you insight into what could be some of the things you can do to help that kind of person who's struggling with that kind of a situation. Now, another thing you can do is you can go to other people that you know who have struggled with a similar thing, and you can interview them and ask them. See, you're doing the homework, you're finding something that is typically needed with people who are struggling with whatever it is, X or Y, and then you go and you provide whatever you can. Yes, sir.
At what point you try to help, and you do things, and you get, like, hey, get out of here, I don't want your help. At what point do you basically say, enough is enough, I'm out of here?
He's asking at what point do you just give up? You know, you keep trying, but they won't permit you to participate in their life.
Isn't that like a part of their grieving and their thing?
It can, with some people, it can be. You know, it's just like with some people, when they've suffered great loss, they crave the presence of other people. And then there are some people, more likely introverted type people, that when they suffer great loss, they want space. They want to be alone. Like the guy, this fella, he's very early 70s, and he said, I feel so alone, and I want other people around. But then when other people are around, I just want them to leave so I can cry. And you just don't know. You really don't know what you need. It's just so confusing, with your emotions the way they are, and you're struggling with your brain function. You're just a mess. And it'd just be a good thing for us to embrace the mess that we are, because that's the reality. There are things that happen in our life where for a while we're just going to be a mess. Let's quit saying, when asked, how are you? What do we say? I'm fine. I'm okay. If you're not fine or not okay, say it, because how are we ever going to help one another if we don't know one another are struggling? Yes, ma'am, Claudia.
I have not been in a lot of congregations, but I can tell you that I don't think you could go anywhere in this world and find another congregation that is any more giving and loving and caring than the one we have right here.
She's
My family, more than my family is my family.
It's your family here more than your family is your family. What a commendation. She said that, admitted that she doesn't know a lot of different congregations, but she knows that this church will be a loving, supportive, helpful church. Now, the church can't be that unless the people in the church admit the fact that they need help. And there is independence, and then there's independence to a fault. And there is sometimes people who guard their privacy so tightly because of their concern about what other people think, that they are not loved like God wants them to be loved actively, because they don't want people to know that they're struggling and that they need help. We have got to cultivate in the church a greater sense of transparency, of the kind of fellowship where we're willing to admit at times we're not okay and we need the help of other people. When I was in Seymour, Tennessee, I loved when we were worshiping, I preached, and in the course of the preaching, I was talking about some of these kinds of things. And when we offered the invitation, there was an older lady who came forward on my right. And then there was a young lady in her 20s that came forward on my left. Now, the woman on my right, when someone engaged with her, that person explained to the whole church that she was caregiving and she was at her wit's end. And because of that caregiving, it was having a tremendous effect on her. And she was having a real hard time coping. I couldn't help but think that morning, how many other people in her church family did not know that until she made that clear that Sunday morning. Now, the young lady who came over here was broken. She was crying buckets of tears because her parents were getting a divorce. Her mother was in the back of the auditorium on my right. I had a chance to get to know her mother and what she had gone through in regard to this man that she was married to. And she had every right in the world to close the door on that relationship and walk away. And I'm so proud of that sister in the Lord that she had the courage to do that, because in that situation, it was the right thing to do. But that didn't change the fact that this young lady in her 20s was struggling with her parents getting a divorce, and she was a mess. How many people in her church family knew that the divorce was having an effect on the daughter like it was? I think the vast majority of them didn't know that until that Sunday morning. We need to create the kind of culture in the church where we are willing to go either to a person, a small group of people, or the whole church family and seek the help of other people. And that is especially true when we've suffered great loss, whether it's the loss of our health, the loss of our child to the devil, to the world, the loss of our home, the loss of a very, very close friendship that you've had for years, the loss of your finances. There are so many things that we can experience the loss of that can have a tremendous effect on us. And we've got to realize that this is a challenging time in our life, but if we seek the right kind of help and recognize we're in that intensive care phase of our life, we can navigate this just like people in the intensive care. Eventually, they get out, right? And they get to go to a regular room. But you need to be in the intensive care unit when you need to be in the intensive care unit. You got to recognize that and embrace that. I suspicion it might be a good idea to take a break, yes. Let's take a break and let's designate a period of time, and how about we do 10 minutes? Miss Becky, there are things down the hall there, and the Lord will permit us to take some of his calories. It's 10:07, so 10:17 is when we'll come back. Thank you very much for participation. This is way better than I thought. I'm glad I had a low bar for you this morning. Yeah, I got over that several years ago. I used to feel a little hesitant about that. I have no problem. Exactly.
I can't tell you.
In his mind, he is compelled. Who's the guy that won the it was in the evening. I need to get a picture with that guy. Does he usually come to church here? The guy that knew, doesn't he have a goatee or a beard? Will he be at church here Sunday? Oh, okay. So he should be. Yes. Okay. I wanted to get a picture with him, with one of these, because I always want to brag about people who have useless knowledge. I want to get a picture with him.
Just fine.
Well, his dad, I found out his dad grew up with God. That's pretty more. There you go. His dad was
in regard to the subject of grief, my suspicion is you probably have heard a two-word phrase, grief work. Grief work. Eric Lindemann, a psychiatrist, is the one credited with coming up with that terminology. 1944, he was the first person that we have on record using that terminology, grief work. Whenever we're suffering and struggling with our life after great loss, there is a lot of work that we need to do, grief work. We need to be effectively working on ourselves with understanding and patience because it is a process. You know, I can tell when a person has been to a professional counselor, a therapist, because they'll use that word process, about how they need to process something. And there's so much truth to that. You know, we human beings, when we experience things, we need to process those things. Let me share with you a quote out of a book that's titled, How to Go On Living When Someone You Love Dies. See, not everybody goes on living when somebody they love dies. Because what happens sometimes is people die when other people die in their life. One of the mottos of the Widowhood Workshop Ministry is, don't die until you're dead. Now, you may feel dead, you may want to die when somebody you love dies, but you're not dead. And we need to choose life, not just merely existing, we need to choose life. And that can be a very difficult thing because your feeler is shouting to you, I don't like this. I don't want to go on. I don't want to deal with this. And because of that feeler shouting so loudly to you, you ignore what you need to do for yourself to get to a place that you might call recovery. And there is recovery from grief. I'm not suggesting that the grief ends. I'm just suggesting that you can recover from the grief to the point that you can learn to live with it and let it become a part of your story, your life story, but not let it be what identifies you. Now, the book is entitled, How to Go On Living When Someone You Love Dies. Here's the quote. As a griever, you need to appreciate the fact that grief is work. It requires expenditure of both physical and emotional energy. It is no less of a task than digging a ditch or any other physical labor. It is work. After my wife passed away, I read everything I could get my hands on, written by people who had lost their spouse, because that was what I was primarily focused on. I needed help to navigate this situation of my wife being gone. And so everything I could get my hands on, written by somebody who was a widow or a widower, I read. And it was very beneficial. It was work, okay? I had to find the resource, and I had to secure the resource, then I had to read the resource, but it was grief work. I also attended a support group. Now, my wife died on Christmas morning of 2013. Middle of January of 2014, I called Mercy Medical Center, which is a Catholic hospital in Canton, Ohio, that provided the hospice services for my wife the last 5 months of her life. And because they were at least somewhat faith-based, I preferred to contact them and become a part of a support group there of people who were suffering loss and having to deal with it. So I called them up. This is the middle of January. It's about 3 weeks after my wife passed away. And I explained to them what I wanted, and they said, no, you don't qualify. So that made me mad. But that was a part of the process of going through all this. So I didn't qualify. Now you may wonder, why didn't I qualify? Why couldn't I be a part of their support group? That was a grief support group. Because they had this rule. You had to be out from your loss at least 90 days before you could become a part of the group. Now, even when she explained it, I was still mad. And I didn't understand, and that's why I was mad. But now I totally understand. You're such a mess early on. Those first 90 days, it's all about just breathing. You just keep breathing. That's how bad it can be when you suffer great, I mean really great loss in your life. During those first 90 days, if you were a part of a support group like that, I seriously doubt you'd actually hear much and be able to internalize much. And I definitely don't think you'd be much in the way of a contributor to the discussion or the atmosphere because you're such a mess. Your mind is so confused, your feeler is being messed with, and so it's a good rule that they have. It's a good policy they have. You got to survive those first 90 days, and then we'll let you in. I don't know if that's the case with most grief support groups, but I totally understand why they did that with me. You know, for years, I had encouraged people who had suffered great loss to not be ashamed of the fact if they got involved with a support group for something. And I thought after decades of telling people that, I ought to practice what I preach. So that's why I ended up in a support group at Mercy Medical Center in Canton, Ohio. So, number one, it confuses what grief does to us. It confuses our thinker. Number two, it messes with our feeler, and that's why we're a basket case. Now, it also prompts us to wonder why. It is a very common thing for us human beings to want to figure stuff out. Now, if you were able to figure out why you suffered loss, would that change the fact that you've got to deal with your loss? It wouldn't. It wouldn't change. The loss still occurred. You've still got to deal with it. Now, I have a sweet friend who January 9th will be the second anniversary of her husband's passing. She has become more than a friend. She is such a sweet, sweet person. She's struggled a lot because she had a great marriage. Her and her husband had what seems to me to be a storybook life together. They were such a perfect match. Now, the flaw with marriage is, and the shame of it all, is only flawed people are in it. Only imperfect people are in it. But you can be a perfect match with somebody else. And they just seem to have been a perfect match. She was married for a little over 30 years. Now, one of her problems, I remember talking to her on the phone one evening, and she was just having a real hard time understanding. She was wanting to figure this out. And at one point in the conversation, I stopped her and I said, Cindy, what did you do for a living? I knew what she did for a living. I just wanted her to tell me. She said, I was a physics teacher in high school. I said, what do you do in physics? And she admitted, you figure stuff out. You have these problems, and you very logically in physics, you figure stuff out. That's kind of like an engineer brain. My son-in-law is one of those. He works for Honda in Tallapoosa, Georgia. You know, there are some people who are just geared mentally, driven to figure stuff out. Now, I am not that way. I'm totally not. I'm totally the opposite. I remember studying a little bit about electricity when I was in 9th grade at New Philadelphia High School in Ohio. And we had this section of time where we were studying about electricity. And I found it all fascinating. It was really interesting. I don't remember any of it now, except the color, the two different colors of wires. I do remember that part. Okay, now, I don't need to know how electricity works to benefit from it. I don't feel compelled to understand how electricity works. I just am real glad to know when I plug something in that if I don't have moisture on my hand, that I could benefit from plugging that in. I don't have to know how it works. I don't have to figure that out. And that's the kind of person I am. But there are other people who they just have to figure stuff out. I mean, they are really driven. And I'm so glad I'm not that kind of person. Now, People like me have problems, and then people who want to figure things out. Well, this friend of mine, she's that way. And I said, Cindy, I said, there are things that you'll never figure out. And I quoted to her Charles Hodge. Charles Hodge had some interesting sayings, and one of them that I really appreciated was on the back of the Gospel Advocate publication, when for years he wrote the last article in that publication every month. He made this observation. He said, faith does not give us answers. It gives us the ability to live without answers.
Amen.
And I said, Cindy, you may never figure this out, but you don't have to. The reality is, sometimes we just have to learn that what we need is the ability to live without the answers. But boy, do we ever want to know why, don't we? We want to know why. Now, don't you think it's interesting? This is human nature, I guess. Don't you think it's interesting that when something bad happens, we wonder why? Do we wonder why when something good happens? Okay, you marry the dream of your life. Do we ask the Lord, why in the world, Lord, am I so blessed to marry her or him? Every day. Afterwards, not at the ceremony. Okay, then you got your dream job. And you have worked and toiled to get to the point where your goal was to become this particular kind of person in this particular field. And do you ask the Lord why? Why in the world, Lord, could I be so blessed? Or you get this huge raise. And do we immediately start thinking, why, Lord, am I so blessed to get a raise? I didn't even ask for it. But boy, when something bad happens, we're real quick to wonder why, aren't we? And it just seems like that must be human nature. Now, let me point out to you that it's okay to ask that question. I mean, you shouldn't feel guilty because you ask. You're just in a club with the rest of us. I think we all have a tendency to ask that question because we do wonder. We have a lot of curiosity about a lot of things, and we have a thinker, and we want our thinker to figure stuff out. The reality is, a lot of wonderful people have done the same thing, wondered why. Job, remember yesterday we talked about him. All those terrible things that he lost. Chapter 3, verse 11. Why did I not die at birth? Whew! That's a great man of God who says that. Why did I not perish when I came from the womb? Verse 12 of chapter 3. Why did the knees receive me? Chapter 3, verse 20. Why is light given to him who is in misery and life to the bitter of soul? Who longed for death, but it does not come? He was longing for death. He wanted the Lord to take him. And he couldn't understand why. Take me, Lord. Verse 23. Why is light given to a man whose way is hidden and whom God has hedged in? Why? That is a very normal, typical human response to an awful time in your life. It just seems automatic that we would think that way. Now, you've got the psalmist who makes the same response, wondering about why. But my all-time favorite is Gideon. In Judges chapter 6, Gideon is experiencing with Israel an awful time. And now the reason why Israel is struggling, and Gideon is in the midst of them, is because Israel has not been faithful. And God is having them experience discipline for the purpose of bringing them back to him. But Gideon, as a human being, he is struggling with this. And he can't understand why the Lord is permitting them or making them suffer so much. So here's his question. Now I want you to watch this question. It's one of my favorite questions in the Bible. If the Lord is with us, why is all this happening to us? Now, I'm going to say it again, and when I say it again, here's what I want you to think about. What does that tell you about Gideon's thinking about the Lord being with us? If the Lord is with us, why is all this happening to us? What does that tell you about his thinking? If the Lord is with us, what should we experience? Good things. Blessings. Because he's the giver of every good and perfect gift. If the Lord is with us, why in the world are we suffering like this? Well, there is an answer to that question. They're suffering because they've been unfaithful to the Lord, and the Lord is lovingly trying to bring them back. But Gideon doesn't understand that. He evidently is not aware of that. Now, the Lord's with us as children of God. That does not exempt us from suffering. It does not exempt us from going through tragic times, heart-rending times, times when it is painful to try to breathe, and we don't feel like getting up out of bed. And if we finally feel like we can get up out of bed, we don't want to get dressed. And then we get to a point where, though we may get up out of bed and may get dressed, we don't want to go out of the house. It's like going into enemy territory. And that's how miserable that you can feel and how much you can struggle whenever you've suffered great loss. And even Jesus on the cross, what did he say? What question did he bring up? Why have you, and who's the you? God, the Father. Why have you forsaken me? I think that really communicates to us, at least it ought to, the humanity of Jesus.
Amen.
Even Jesus, even God in the flesh, he knew about humanity. You know, we read about him being hungry. We read about him being weary. Well, he struggled with the question why, painfully hanging on the cross. So it's not a terrible thing to ask the question. It's not a sinful thing. However, we've got to realize the vast majority of times we may never know the answer. Faith gives us the ability to live without answers. I love H. Norman Wright's observation. It's one of the greatest feats of life. I think he's right. It's one of the greatest feats of life to get to the point where you don't have to know why. You just keep living and praising the Lord. Jim, you were going to make an observation?
People in the body, as you know, have lost their faith over this.
Mm-hmm.
And even though the question is normal and can be asked, I think it's important before the loss happens, because the questions are, if it's a loving God, this shouldn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
If it's an all-powerful God, this shouldn't happen. We need to answer that from the Bible before the loss happens.
Exactly.
Not that we can have the answer, but it's easier to cope with the living without the answer. If you don't answer that before it happens,
You're going to have a real hard time answering it in the storm
yeah,
of grief. You're right. You are so right. That's why these Living with Loss workshops are not just about helping people who are maybe presently in a storm trying to learn to live with grief. It's also about educating people who have not yet experienced great loss in their life, but they will, because that's what happens in a broken world. In a broken world, people experience great loss. Knowing ahead, this book that I quoted from earlier about how to go on living when someone you love dies, she made the observation as an author in that book in another place. She said, from her academic research and from her personal experience, individually and as a counselor, she said, knowing about grief ahead of time helps. It helps you navigate the experience. Now, C.S. Lewis, who married older in life, he lost his wife. He wrote a book called A Grief Observed. It's a powerful book, very transparently written by a very smart man who is deeply reflective, and he is really good at communicating what it was like after his wife passed away. I want to quote from that book because this is the challenge that faith-based people have whenever we suffer great loss. He says, you never know how much you really believe anything until its truth or falsehood becomes a matter of life and death to you. It is easy to say you believe a rope is strong enough and sound as long as you are merely using it to cord a box. But suppose you had to hang by that rope over a precipice. Wouldn't you then first discover how much you really trusted it? The point he's trying to make is, until your faith is tested, I mean really tested, how strong is your faith? And one of the blessings of great loss, as weird as that sounds, is you find yourself being tested about the quality of your faith. Just how strong is your faith? And how dependent do you sense you are on the Lord? One of the things that we need to do as early on in life as possible is learn to live with the reality we are not going to know the answer to the question why all the time in our life. We have to live to learn without the answers. Grief has a tremendously powerful effect in our life. It's so thoroughgoing, the nature of it. In that quote, it mentions about mentally, emotionally, psychologically, socially, physically, spiritually. It has a tremendous collateral damage effect in your life. Now, you may wonder about why socially is up there. Widowed people who lose their spouse typically lose 75% of their social network. 75%. That was the most shocking thing I found out early on when I started reading everything I could get my hands on. Now, there's different reasons why it has that social effect. Number one, you're miserable. People don't like to be around miserable people. Two, they don't know what to do with you. And three, if they really love you and they don't want to hurt you, and they don't want to say or do anything that hurts you, they stay away from you, and that hurts you because that's neglect. A lot of your friends are friends you have because you're a couple. And you as a couple have coupled friends. But you're not a couple anymore. You're half of a whole, and the whole's been blown up. So you're a social misfit. So your social network is blown up. And that's one reason why a part of the Widowhood Workshop Ministry is helping widowed people find connection with other widowed people in some way, maybe through Facebook, through a workshop locally, or through our annual retreat that we have. But one thing that parents who've lost children need is they need connection with other parents who've lost children. There was a youth minister at the College Side Church in Cookeville, Tennessee. A terrible tornado came through Middle Tennessee, destroyed their home, but more importantly, they lost Hallie, who was 4 years old. The only death in their family. He covered her up, the father did, but she died as a result of that tornado. They established a foundation called Magnolia Foundation, and it seeks to help parents who've lost children. There is a guy out in Oklahoma that I met who has a life-altering disease. I can't even pronounce the name of it. He has struggled with it for years in his life. He has suffered great loss. He became very disconnected because of his ill health, and he's a preacher. And what he decided to do is start a ministry to help people who are dealing with life-altering and sometimes very painful diseases in their life. And he is creating connection with other people literally all over the world in his ministry. It's called Broken and Mended. You can Google that, Broken and Mended. Whenever we're dealing with loss, it's very valuable to get connected with other people who've had similar losses in their life. Because the grief that we experience in whatever unique loss we've had, it does have a powerful effect in our life. This brother, Josh Allen, he grew up in the Hartville, Ohio church where I was for many years. He went to Freed-Hardeman University and he met April there. April Henson. And they got married, and they had 2 girls. And after those 2 girls, they had a boy, and his name was Andrew. And Andrew, at 7 years old, died. Everywhere I go, when I travel, I have this card with me. It's from his memorial service in Pikeville, Kentucky. I was in Gainesville, Florida, visiting with my daughter when Andrew died. My daughter attended college with the parents of Andrew. And we got in the car and we drove from Gainesville, Florida to Pikeville, Kentucky to be with that family. You should have seen the amazing reaction of that community to Andrew's death. I've never seen so many people at a visitation or calling hours. On Friday, the day of the memorial service, school was shut down. When we left the building where the memorial service was and we headed to the cemetery, as we passed by his school, the flag was at half-mast. Why in the world would a 7-year-old boy die? Sometimes life is so hard to deal with. You talk about questions and wondering why. You can't help but wonder why. You just have to keep holding on to your faith to help you deal with what you don't know. One thing that grief does to us is it challenges us. There is great benefit in being challenged. You know, when somebody says, you can't do that, sometimes there are some ears that hear that and say, yes, I can, and yes, I will. One of the mottos of the Widowhood Workshop Ministry is, I can and I will. I can and I will survive. I can and I will learn to cope, and I can and I will grow through this experience. I can and I will by the grace of God. That's the kind of attitude and spirit that we've got to embrace when we've suffered great loss. And it can have great benefit being challenged. As a matter of fact, look at how we have the ability as Christians, how we have the ability to take awful things that happen in our life, burdens, and we can actually turn them into blessings. Watch this. Romans chapter 5. After talking a lot about justification by faith through Jesus Christ, then he says, verse 3, and not only that, but we glory in tribulations. Now, if I was writing that, I would say, we grieve in tribulations. That's what we do. That's the natural human reaction. We grieve in tribulations, but we can also glory in tribulation. That's crazy faith, is what that is. But that's what Christianity is. That's what first century Christianity is. It's crazy faith. It's faith that's crazy to people who have only seen a watered-down version of Christianity that nowhere compares to first century faith. And not only that, we glory in tribulation. How could you possibly glory in tribulation? Knowing that tribulation produces perseverance, and perseverance, character, and character, hope. And notice what kind of hope. Now, hope that does not disappoint. It's an uncommon hope that we can find building within us because we've been persistent because of our struggle. And we have developed this character that's provided this persevering spirit that has built within us hope. And though we're experiencing tribulation, we're benefiting in the process. And the blessing of tribulation is the growth we can experience because of it. Often it's accelerated growth because we've been challenged. Yesterday, I referred to my daughter and my son-in-law as PTs. They're pain terrorists. Their job is to cause us pain to be challenged so that we can get to a better place. I submit to you that's one of the reasons why, in a broken world, God permits the harsh realities we experience in life. Because He knows that we can choose to be greatly blessed by the experience of the heartache that we have in this life. We can choose, and it's a choice. We can choose blessings in the storms, in the burdens, but it's a choice. Great loss can ruin people's faith. Great loss can cause marriages to tank and families to become dysfunctional. Great loss can cause people to go into depression and have serious mental struggles the rest of their lives. But that does not have to happen. We can choose, by the grace of God with His help, to take those awful things and turn them into blessings. We become more knowledgeable, more wise, and more experienced by the awful things that we experience. And we can become more qualified to more effectively help other people. Who's going to help the young lady who has suffered a miscarriage best? Some other woman who's been through that same experience. Who's going to help that cancer patient who's staring down the barrel of surgery and treatment, the loss of hair, puking the guts out, so debilitated they don't want to get up out of bed? Who's going to help the cancer patient who's looking down the barrel of that gun? A cancer survivor who's been down that same road. Don't waste your pain. Don't waste a single painful thing you've experienced in this life. Use it for the glory of God by choosing to help other people. But you first have to commit yourself to surviving, coping, and growing. Now we're going to take another break. And when we take this break, I want to encourage you to make it a reasonably of length break, because the next session, in my opinion, is the most important session I ever do. And I want to make sure that we have enough time. Could we give ourselves 5 minutes? And if you need to go get you some caffeine to help you stay awake, and need to get up and stretch, please do that. Please, let's take a break for 5 minutes. Let's get back together at 11 o'clock. If you don't come back on time, I will sing to your ears, much to your chagrin, Barry Manilow's I Can't Smile Without You. If you hear that song, you know you're late.